Long ago, in the age when trolls still waged war against the Akir, the Cathraxi warbringer Mythrax the Unraveler was unleashed upon the western sands. He descended with the fury of the old gods, and in his wake both Troll and Sethrak fell by the thousands. It was only through the sacrifice of the great Loa Sethraliss that Mythrax was struck down. Yet even in defeat, the creature's might was ruinous. He shattered the disc at the heart of Atulamon before he fell. What had once been a lush jungle slowly withered away. The passing of ages, coupled with endless cataclysms, stripped the region bare until it became the desert now known as Vol'dun. Most trolls abandoned the wasteland, leaving behind only the Sethrak, who survived amidst the sands. To the Sethrak, this desolation remained sacred ground, consecrated by the sacrifice of their Loa. Having seen firsthand the devastation Mythrax brought onto the land, the Sethrak swore to ensure he would never rise again. The three keepers, Soltis, Vorrik, and Korthik, united their power to bind the Cathraxi within the pyramid of Atulamon. For a time, their vigil held, but centuries later, Korthik grew hungry for dominion. Where once he had guarded against the old god's servant, he now dreamed of wielding it. He declared himself emperor, rallied the Faithless to his banner, and plunged his people into civil war. Through these long centuries, Zandalar treated Vol'dun as a place of punishment, casting exiles into the desert to die. Few survived its unforgiving heat, its predators, and its shifting sands. Those who did were often wanderers, outcasts, or the Volpera caravans that learned to make their way as nomads. Even outsiders sought to plunder its secrets. During the Fourth War, the Ashvane Company came to strip the land for Azerite, carving into the southern rocks for profit. Many years later, the struggle between devoted and faithless had finally ebbed, and Vol'dun began to see new life. Queen Talanji called the Zandalari exiles home, while the Volpera carved out places of their own. The ancient burrows were rebuilt, joined by the Volpera hideaway and a market at the Scorching Sands outpost, shared with the devoted. Old wounds lingered, but many of both faithless and devoted found themselves forced to move forward, leaving the war behind them. Even Atulamon gained a new meaning, repurposed by young Volpera as a site of coming of age. Thus, the desert, once cursed by blood and shadow, grew into a land of uneasy renewal, forever shaped by sacrifice, yet still reaching for tomorrow. Bladeguard Kaja crossed into Vol'dun with two things, a mission and a warning. Rakera was missing, unaccounted for, possibly dead. And somewhere beyond the sands, the name Jakra'zet echoed louder than it should have. Not in shouted orders, but in whispers. There had been no grand command, just a quiet word from Talanji and Kaja was gone. She had her target, and that was enough. The flight was direct, fast and silent. No banners, no formation, no comfort in numbers. Just Kaja, two riders flanking her, Dorana and Tarkaj, and Talanji's champion riding close at her back, sharing wind and saddle straps as the jungle fell away behind them. They flew low over Nazmir's canopy, where the air still smelled of wet leaves and rot. But ahead, the world cracked open. No trees, no green, only jagged stone and scorched wind. Vol'dun yawned wide like a wound that had never healed. Here, the Empire cast its unwanted. Here, the sun burned the names of the dead. Kaja tightened her grip and adjusted course. The ridges rose, red rock and dry teeth, and for a moment she thought they might make it through clean. But then the air changed, a flicker, then a crack. Then the sky ignited. Not from the moon, not from any storm, but from something summoned, something waiting. Lightning tore through the flight path, unnatural and precise. An enemy was waiting for them.
We need to speed things up. The king has nosy visitors. That could pose a problem.
You do your parts, General, and I will do mine.
Trespassers!
You will die in these dunes.
Everyone, break ranks! Make your way to safety! Get as far from these snakes as you can!
The canyon was quiet when the outsider arrived. Not silent, but hushed, like the desert itself was waiting. They followed the curve of the ridgeline down into a narrow hollow carved by time and wind. Torchlight flickered against the stone, casting long shadows across crates and bedrolls. A pair of Vol'dun stood watch near the outer edge, perched on the backs of resting hyenas, their silhouettes still beneath the stars. No challenge was issued. The guard had already seen who approached, and who they arrived with. Nisha had found them in the Sethraliss grasp earlier that evening, half-beaten and stripped of weapons. She didn't say much when she returned, only that she'd gotten what she needed, and that the outsider had earned their second chance. Now they were here. At the center of the camp, Blade Guard Kaja lay across a worn blanket. Her body was still, her breath shallow. Sweat clung to her brow despite the chill, and her skin had turned the wrong shade, too pale in some places, too flushed in others. She murmured faintly, words lost before they ever reached her lips. Nero knelt beside her, moving with quiet urgency. He checked her pulse, adjusted the cloth beneath her neck, and hovered his hand just over her forehead. Whatever poison had taken hold, it was digging in. Mira stood nearby, arms crossed, trying to look calm and failing. She stole glances at Kaja every few seconds, as if expecting her to vanish. The outsider stepped closer, and Nero needed venom from the sand stingers nearby, and Mira wanted there to be something to help Kaja's thirst when she woke. Nero would stay. Mira too. The outsider nodded once and turned into the night. Wind caught the edge of the blanket beneath Kaja, rustling it gently. A torch sputtered in its sconce. The desert, for now, held its breath. Sometime later, the outsider returned, carrying what the desert would give. Venom sacs from the sand stingers and juice pressed from thorn-split pricklevine. Nero said little, only set to work. The mixture stung sharp as it was pressed to Kaja's skin, but it pulled the fever down like a tide receding. Kaja's breath steadied long before her eyes opened. The balm had done its work, but the strength it left behind was brittle, unfinished. She moved slowly beneath the shelter of the rock, joints tight, muscles aching from the effort of surviving. Mira was the first to speak, softly, something about being glad to see her awake. But it was the pages nearby that held Kaja's attention. She picked them up one by one. She knew what needed to be done and what direction they had to head to. The caravan left quickly. Kaja rode beside Mira at the front, quiet but focused, her eyes scanning every ridge and windswept track. The notes recovered from Akira's journal weren't complete, but they gave direction, south, toward the distant edges of Atulaman. The trail was thin, and the desert gave nothing easily. While the Vol'dun were willing to help, it wasn't free. The Faithless had raided their caravan some time ago, stealing not only trade goods and tools, but personal keepsakes, the kind of things you didn't trade but still couldn't live without. So the outsider did what was asked. They hunted through Sethraliss camps, broke open crates, reclaimed what had been taken. It wasn't all supplies. Just inside the mouth of one cave, the outsider came upon a scene they hadn't expected. A Sethraliss impaled by a familiar blade. Tarkaja's weapon, deep in the creature's chest, hilt pointed toward the ceiling of the cave. Around the body lay 3 more Faithless, cut down in the same brutal fashion. But there was no sign of Tarkaj himself, no trail, no message, not even a drop of blood, just the sword, placed like a grave marker, and silence. Farther along the journey, the desert offered up a second wound. They found Jorana's body collapsed beside her mount, both lying still in the open dust. There were no words, no signs of violence. Whether it had been the crash or the lightning, it didn't matter now. She hadn't made it far. Though not all was lost, scattered across the rocks, half buried in sand and wind, the outsider found more of Rakera's pages, some in a broken satchel, others caught beneath dried thorn branches, just enough to give Kaja what she needed. She read them without speaking.
I write this as I sit in a cage with a dozen other exiles, traveling to the sands where we will live out our days, however numbered they may be. The air, heavy with heat, tells me we're close. The sun has set across the dunes, providing some relief from the heat that has made many delirious. In a sun-stricken stupor, one among us began rambling about a temple to the south that welcomes exiles. I doubt he will make it through the night. Assassins, sent by Jakra'zet, attacked our camp in the middle of the night. Unarmed and befuddled by sleep, we were unable to defend ourselves. I fought off the traitors, but it was too late. The survivors had scattered, each now forced to navigate this unforgiving terrain alone. I won't survive much longer without food or water. After traveling in circles for most of the day, I decided my only option was to follow the advice of a rambling madman and head south toward the promise of shelter.
Her fingers running over each line as if the shape of the writing alone could prove Rakera still lived. Every entry painted a path, injuries, movement, a push toward shelter, and then mention of a temple, not named but known. Kaja folded the pages into her satchel. They kept moving. The trio made their way south, the wagon groaning under its weight as the desert stretched wide around them. Mira spoke as they rode.
You keep an eye out for your friend. I'll keep my eyes on the road. Zemlon's port is to the south. Ships haven't sailed into its dockyard for years, but it's still our best chance at getting what Kiro and Nisha need for their attack on the Sethrak. Can you believe this wasteland was once the jewel of the Troll Empire? A jungle teeming with life! Now, whatever's left is buried beneath the sands.
How could Rakera survive in such a place?
I doubt she could. Most of your kind can't. Well, not anymore.
I will find her, or die trying. Mira, stop the caravan. I see something up ahead. This is Rakera's shield. Where is she? What have you done to her?
Jakra'zet's to blame for this, not me. Rakera's the only reason I'm still alive.
Jorrak leaned forward as the sun dipped lower, his expression distant, not from heat but memory. He spoke of the first night he had spent in the desert, when sleep had been broken not by the cold, but by the sound of death. Assassins had come, silent, fast, and they weren't hunting aimlessly. They were looking for Rakera. They'd been led by a brute named Groztuk, and when they couldn't find Rakera, they were going for Jorrak. But Rakera had intervened. She'd driven them off, chased them into the dunes under cover of darkness. That had been days ago, and she hadn't returned since. Worse still, the assassins had taken the offerings the exiles had brought with them, satchels of goods meant for the temple. Jorrak had heard stories. The temple was a place of safety, but only for those who came with tribute. To enter without offering was to be turned away. With no time to lose, the outsider rode out alone, searching the sands for what the assassins had stolen, and for any sign that Rakera had passed that way. Fighting through ambushes and circling enemies, they came upon an unexpected sight at a door leading into a Tulaman, and there, standing in the open, was Jakra'zet, speaking with Groztuk, trying to force entry into the ancient sanctuary.
We can't get in. The door is sealed with magic we've never seen.
Silence! We are not alone.
You made a mistake coming to these dunes. The princess can't save you now.
Groztuk, deal with these trespassers. Do not fail me again.
The confrontation was inevitable. Groztuk fought like a zealot, all fury and brute strength, wielding blades as if to carve the truth from the sand itself. But the outsider didn't break. Blow for blow, the champion gave no ground, until at last, Groztuk fell in the shadow of the temple he tried to defile. With the satchels reclaimed and Jakra'zet's presence confirmed, the outsider returned to the others. There was still no sign of Rakera, no new trail, no message left behind. But her name was in the notes, and the temple had been mentioned more than once. That was enough. Rakera stood beside the splintered wagon, staring out across the ruins, the dark stone of a Tulaman half buried in the sand ahead. She didn't speak for long, only said what needed saying. They were going to the temple. The four of them climbed into the caravan. Mira took the reins, with Kaja and Jorrak to her sides while the outsider climbed into the back, the wood creaking beneath their weight. Without another word, the wheels turned, and the desert opened once more. They arrived at the temple as lightning cracked overhead, not from storm clouds, but from the building itself. Energy rippled across the stone, striking out periodically from its highest spire. Worshippers moved around the ground in a daze, faces calm, expressions unreadable. But one figure stood apart, a troll near the entrance, where the main door was blocked by a shimmering wall of lightning. Kaja moved toward it, eager to see if Rakera was here. The outsider followed, but before they could cross the threshold, Jorak stepped forward and placed something in their hands. The offerings he had carried. He owed Rakera his life. If she was here, he wanted to help them reach her. The gatekeeper said there was no one named Rakera here. At this temple, everyone is Akunda in honor of the Loa they worship. They hoped the offering would be enough, but the gatekeeper made it clear they couldn't enter, not yet. They weren't turned away though, but they weren't welcomed either. The temple had rules, rights, requirements. Akunda the Exalted gave the instructions without fanfare, as if the outsider's compliance had already been assumed. The outsider fulfilled them, digging up what was asked, clearing out what wasn't welcome. That finished the physical trials, but the mental ones remained. To reach the heart of the temple, the outsider would need to endure the rite of clarity, a ritual meant to still the mind and cleanse the spirit. It sounded simple, but what waited in that stillness was not peace. In the quiet of meditation, something stirred. A shadow self emerged, not just doubt, but something twisted, something poisoned by the same force that pulsed through the temple like heat sunk into stone. The outsider stood against it, and in that moment, a voice broke through the haze.
I grow weaker by the moment. You must help me before it is too late.
Akunda, distant, strained, and unmistakably real. He was still alive, but barely. Something was draining him, tethering him in silence while his power slipped away with each breath. He couldn't hold on much longer. When the vision ended, the outsider followed the pull of that fading voice. The temple's sacred water had grown foul, clouded with decay and ruin. Cleansing it wasn't just a task, it was a message, a step forward freeing whatever was left of the true Akunda. At the gate, the Exalted welcomed the outsider back. The ritual had been endured, and the mind had been cleared. With solemn reverence, Akunda the Exalted spoke. All who passed the trials were to receive a new name, a name spoken aloud in exchange for entry. The outsider gave theirs.
Welcome, Akunda the Nimble.
The storm-wreathed barrier parted, the doors opened. Inside, Kaja caught sight of her at once, but something was wrong. The Zandalari woman standing near the temple's edge bore a blank expression, and moved with ritual calm. She wore the robes of a worshipper. She answered only to the name Akunda the Forlorn. But Kaja knew her. There was no mistaking the face, the stance, the edge that hadn't quite dulled in her eyes. It was Rakera. She wouldn't leave without her. One of the temple's followers, his voice brittle with uncertainty, whispered to the outsider. A friend of his had gone to the Valley of Sorrows and hadn't returned. Memories were vanishing, not just Rakera's, his own. If anyone could help, it would be Melani. So the outsider went, leaving the others behind beneath the shadow of the temple. The valley stretched in dry folds of stone and silence. Nothing grew there, not anymore. On the edge of the valley, Melani waited. She had a similar haze in her eyes to her friend in the temple who sent the outsider here. But she could still piece together that something was wrong and how to fix it. She offered guidance with a warning. The past was buried here, but not safely. Akunda's memories had fractured and many had turned hostile. The outsider broke open the urn she pointed to, stone vessels sealed long ago. From each one something emerged. Not just dust or relics, but memories that breathed and bled. The first showed Rakera, clear-eyed and commanding, warning Kaja of Jakra'zet's betrayal. The second revealed the spring, once sacred, poisoned by Akunda the Exalted as a nearby gazelle drank and died. The third showed Akunda himself, sipping from the spring and collapsing as the blight took hold. And the fourth showed truth. Akunda's body suspended inside the temple, motionless and dim, while the Exalted, cloaked in false reverence, drained the Loa's essence into himself. With the final memory revealed, Melani turned to the outsider. There was a way to reach Akunda's mind directly, but the path was not safe. She would need to perform a ritual, and someone would need to defend her while she did.
I will do my best to prepare Akunda's mind, but you need to be prepared to subdue any memories that might be awakened.
Within the cave, the rite began, and as her chant rose into the hollowed dark, the memories came. Not gentle, not passive, They struck like blades. Distorted fragments of thought turned violent. The outsider held the line until the ritual finished, and then, at last, Akunda's voice rang clear. The Loa had awakened.
My dear child, at last, you can hear me. A traitor lurks within our temple.
With his blessing, the outsider returned to the temple. The time for patience was over. Akunda the Exalted met them with smug certainty. Robes billowing, lightning already building in his hands. But he was no true prophet, not anymore. The fight was swift, violent, and final. Akunda was freed. The fog began to lift from the minds of those who had followed him. Rakera stirred, her memory returned. The woman once called the Forlorn stood straighter now, the fire back in her voice. She knew where they had to go next. The three of them, Rakera, Kaja, and the outsider, regrouped at the caravan. Jorrak remained behind. His journey had brought him this far and no further. For him, the temple was the end of the path. For the others, it was only the beginning. The search for the weapon wasn't over. It had only just begun.
It is as I suspected. General Jakra'zet has troops in the desert, unbeknownst to the king. They scour the dunes, searching for a weapon that can destroy the city, killing any who get in their way. I have no idea what this weapon is, or where to find it, but it can't be good if Jakra'zet is hiding its existence from the king. We must find the weapon before Jakra'zet has a chance to get his hands on it.
The ruins are on the way to Zenlun. I'm happy to take you there. Dolly and Dot are great company, but it's nice to have friends to talk to. We're friends, right?
We wouldn't have found Rakera without you, little one.
But the desert did not let them pass unchallenged. The ambush came with little warning. Shadows surged from the dunes, Sand Fury assassins, blades drawn, striking fast and without sound. The caravan was set on fire and it bucked and swerved. Dolly and Dot, startled by the crash, broke free and tore off toward the distant skyline, with Mira sprinting after them.
Dolly! Dot, wait! It's not safe down there!
The wagon shuddered to a halt as Kaja and Rakera leapt to meet the attack, the outsider close behind. By the time the last assassin lay still, the wind had picked up again, dry, restless, hungry. They followed the alpaca tracks northeast. The path led through shattered rock until the outline of Vol'dun emerged from the haze. Their jagged towers wilted, splintered as if the desert itself had rejected them. There, amidst the ruin, the group came back together. Mira stood near her animals, brushing dust from their coats. In the half-light beneath the crumbling archway, an injured Sethrak lay curled on a mat of worn fabric, limbs tight with pain. Jawaba, a familiar face from Kaja's past, knelt beside him, working to keep him still. Not far off, Kiro waited in calm silence, and Nisha sat atop her hyena, next to Kiro, with a pterodax at rest at the entrance of the building. The Sethrak had taken a sting from a scorpid, and his breathing was thin. Jawaba didn't look up. Kiro knew what was needed. Cactus pulp, venom glands, something to draw the heat out. The outsider understood. This had been done once before. They returned with what was asked for. The mixture was prepared and applied, and the Sethrak's breathing steadied. His body no longer trembled. His strength, though dulled, was returning. The others began to speak with him, careful, slow. He said his name was Sarek, and he remembered more than just pain. He spoke of seekers who had come to Vol'dun hunting something hidden, something left behind. None had succeeded. Most had not returned. But Sarek knew the signs they had missed. He told of a statue near the heart of the ruins, one whose eyes had long been empty. The outsider moved through the ruin, searching among the rubble. One gem lay half buried near a fallen wall, its surface catching the sun just enough to reveal itself. The second sat deeper within the city, inside a structure stripped bare by time, roof fractured, walls crumbling inward. The gems pulsed faintly when handled, like they remembered being part of something of power. On the face of the statue, the gems were placed into waiting sockets. A hum stirred in the air, low, resonant, like breath held too long. The eyes lit, then came a figure, cast from light.
Vorrik, if you are receiving this message, then I fear I was too late. Korthek has betrayed our people and plans to break the barrier we placed on the tomb long ago. I can only hope I've hidden my key well enough so that you are the only one to find it.
When the light faded, something more tangible took its place. A chest of stone and gold, its lid cracked slightly open. Inside rested a single object, a carved relic smooth with age, humming faintly with restrained power. The outsider returned to Sarek and showed the relic what they had found. Sarek took the stone and held it in his hand, staring at it. A long, still moment. He had hoped this would never be needed again. The wind stirred the desert as the outsider mounted Sarek's pterodax. The sky peeled open ahead, revealing distant spires and sandstone plateaus. The beast beat its wings, veering northwest. In their pack, the fragment they had recovered pulsed with quiet weight, a stone marked with age and meaning. Sarek had spoken of a keeper's key, but only one among the devoted would know for certain. His name was Vorrik.
Our temple is the last bastion against the Faithless. Long ago, we lived as one, as our Loa would have wanted. Since Korthek's betrayal, the Faithless have brought war upon these lands. He leads them in their fight, searching for the remaining keys that will allow him to break the barrier around Atul Aman and use what's within to conquer all of Zuldazar. We will do whatever it takes to stop him.
The creature drove low, wind stretched as they neared the sanctuary of the devoted, once sacred, now shuddering with the clash of battle. As the outsider dismounted, Sarek rushed forward to meet another of his kin, urgency laced in their voice. Vorrik had been taken, captured amid the fighting. There was no time to waste. The Faithless had entrenched themselves like sandworms, fast, invasive, and full of venom. Their banners whipped from the upper terraces, cannons had been wheeled into sacred courtyards, and jagged spires pulsed with arcane charge. Sarek pleaded for aid, and the outsider answered. Steel met scale across the sandstone steps. The outsider carved a path through the invaders, banners torn from walls, fire set to siege engines. The air filled with smoke and grit. Spires shattered under the weight of disruption as the temple pushed back against its defilement. Near the northern flank, behind a barricade of broken stone, Vorrik stood locked in a narrow metal cage. The outsider freed him. Vorrik stepped out with measured grace, his voice low, and even as he looked to the one who had come for him, he spoke of life owed, not with sentiment but with purpose. Then he turned, heading for the inner chamber of the temple, leaving behind only one request: meet me inside. The last of the Faithless resistance buckled under the outsider's hand. With the spires broken, the cannons silent, and the banners ash, they entered the temple's heart, where Vorrik waited with answers yet unspoken.
This key belongs to the first keeper. His name was Sulthis, and he died at the hands of Korthek. Long ago, Mythrax the Unraveler descended upon our lands. He slaughtered all in his path, Troll and Sethrak alike. Our Loa sacrificed herself to save us from that monstrosity. She struck the Mythrax down, but not before it was able to destroy the disc at the heart of Atul Aman. After witnessing his destruction firsthand, we knew that something must be done to prevent anyone from raising Mythrax again. Although immensely powerful, Sulthis could not create the barrier alone. Korthek and I lent him our aid, and together we sealed Mythrax within the Great Pyramid. As the sands continued to spread, Korthek grew hungry for war. He plotted to unearth the Mythrax and use him as a weapon to conquer the continent.
A weapon? This must be what Jakra'zet is after. A Mythrax.
We need to warn the princess.
Korthek raised an army of like-minded Sethrak, and they began to slaughter those who opposed them. Sulthis was the first to fall, but not before safeguarding his key. Those of us still loyal to Sethraliss were forced out of our home and into hiding. We have been fighting the Faithless ever since. Korthek has gone too far. I must deal with this personally. Protect the keys while I am away.
We will defend your people as our own.
Meet me at Vol'dun's Fall as soon as you can, champion. We shall sneak into Korthek's fortress together.
You met Vorrik at Vol'dun's Fall, where heat shimmered off the rocks and the wind carried the sting of dust. Beginning the trek, Vorrik tells a tale to the outsider.
We are heading into the heart of the Faithless Empire, champion. It is a cruel nest of rock and dirt, swarming with Sethrak who have forsaken our Loa. I lived here too once, long ago, before Korthek betrayed our people for power and madness. In those days, Korthek and I led all Sethrak in our worship of Sethraliss. My personal sanctum was hidden away in the hills, a small shrine to Sethraliss, where I could meditate. It has been abandoned for years, but it will be an ideal place to launch our... Wait, what are Valkyra doing here?
Be quick. Be clever.
Everyone stay calm. This is one of the good ones. Hot Sands, am I glad to see you, friend? I'm in way over my head here. Nisha will be so happy to see you. She's out at the crater killing Sethrak, like she always is.
I will stay here to prepare for our assault, while you sow chaos among the Faithless. Return soon. We must strike at Emperor Korthek without delay.
The outsider moved on alone, down through the fractured rocks until Nisha came into view. She was already in position, crouched behind a broken rise of stone, her eyes locked on the camp below. Her words were sharp and fast: plant the banners, arm the captives, and let the Faithless burn their strength chasing shadows. It wasn't just rebellion, it was vengeance. Then the banners rose, crimson cloth driven into the chests of the dead, symbols of defiance snapping in the scorched wind. The outsider struck open the cages, iron bars groaning before they gave way. Shackles fell to the sand and blades passed from hand to hand. No orders were given, no plea for courage, only the look of those who had been broken now choosing not to be. Fear moved faster than fire, and in that crater below, a whisper of revolt surged into a howl. The outsiders slipped back through the dunes as the riot bloomed behind them. Smoke curled upward from the crater, and shouts cracking through bursts of lightning. The Faithless had lost their rhythm. The Vol'pera had reclaimed their moment, and the outsider was no longer needed here. But the fight was not yet finished, not while Vorrik still waited. Inside the cave, Vorrik placed the staff into the outsider's hands. His expression was solemn, his voice steady. The staff was not given lightly. It was a symbol of the devoted, a relic of both purpose and trust. It would draw power from the faithless spires above, where suppression towers still pulsed with energy stolen from the pterodax. The energy could be reclaimed, turned back upon its masters. Vorrik had seen a chance to do so, but he could not walk both paths himself. He spoke of another way, another ally, one who had once flown at his side, but time and silence could unmoor even the strongest bond. He did not know if Rakera would remember him, or if the old loyalty still lived. Vorrik would go ahead to try. The outsider in turn would drain the towers and gather the storm's weapons. Once finished, they would meet at the mountain's peak. The outsider moved quickly through the ridge. One by one, the suppression spires were drained, their stolen power pulled into the staff. Its runes flared with each burst, bright against the darkening sky. Across the slope, skycallers fell from their posts, the lightning bombs they carried now pulsing in the outsider's pack, glass canisters humming with stolen storm. When the last charge had been taken, the outsider began climbing through a narrow canyon that twisted upward toward the summit. The wind thinned, the sky opened, and there, high above the broken land, Rockjohn waited, perched atop the mountain's edge. Vorrik stood beside him, hand resting against the creature's scaled flank. Words already spoken. Whatever passed between them had been enough. As the outsider approached, Rockjohn shifted. Without a sound, they mounted together, Vorrik at the reins and the outsider steady behind him. A single cry broke from the beast's throat, long and low, echoing across the peaks. And then Rockjohn launched, his wings splitting the sky. The desert reeled below. From above, they struck in tandem. Bombs dropped in arcs of flame, while the staff's power lashed down in blinding bolts. The gate that sealed Korthik's sanctum flickered once, then it cracked, then it shattered. A wound tore open in the stone by skyfire and fury. There was no pause. The bulwark surged forward, led by Vorrik, breaking through the Faithless ranks like floodwaters loosed from a dam. Relics of Sethraliss, taken, hoarded, defiled, were recovered from shattered altars, carried out in cloth wraps with reverent hands. What had been buried in arrogance was returned to purpose. What had been stolen was no longer theirs to keep. The battle gave way to silence, and the wind no longer carried war. The bulwark slowed, the last relic was wrapped and taken, and still, one shadow had yet stepped into the light. They stood before the sealed entrance of the Temple of Sethraliss. Wind stirred dust across the open courtyard, and the sky overhead churned with stormlight. Korthik had not emerged. He lingered behind stone in silence, clinging to the sanctum he had stolen. Vorrik raised his voice, steady and final. It was not a threat, but a call to end what had begun long ago. Lightning cracked above, the ground surged with power, and in a sudden flash of blue, Emperor Korthik appeared in the temple's mouth. His body wreathed in light, his voice thick with pride. He called himself Eternal, the true power of the Sethrak. Vorrik answered him with sorrow. He spoke of Sethraliss, of the sacrifice she had made to give them peace, and how Korthik had turned that gift into ruin. Storm met flesh, lightning collided with will. The courtyard shook with the fury of the sky. Midway through the storm, Korthik revealed the truth. Jakra'zet already had his key, and likely Vorrik's. Whatever victory was won here would mean nothing. Mythrax would rise. Vorrik's voice cracked, not with fear but with grief. "You fool," he said. "Mythrax cannot be controlled." The Emperor staggered, defiant to the end. He claimed his followers had come willingly, that conquest was in their blood. Vorrik looked on him with something quieter than hatred. "No," he said. "Our people are dead because of you." The final blow fell, lightning dimmed, and the echo of Sethraliss's name passed between them like a prayer. When the storm faded, there was no triumph, only quiet. The storm faded, the wind fell still. There was no cheer, no cry of triumph, only silence. Vorrik turned from the body without a word, his face a mask not of victory but of mourning. Korthik had fallen, yet the words he left behind lingered like smoke. Jakra'zet already had his key, and perhaps Vorrik's as well. The outsider stood still, the weight of that possibility settling like dust across the stones. There was no time to make sense of it here, no time to question whether the trap had already been sprung. They would return to the sanctuary of the devoted, and if the worst had come to pass, if the keys were gone, then they would find what truth remained in the ruin left behind. The storm was gathering when the order came. Vorrik turned to the outsider, voice firm. There was no time to waste. The fight had turned, and the sanctuary of the devoted needed them. His words carried the weight of certainty, the kind that didn't allow for hesitation. Beside them, Nisha made her own choice. The battle here was not finished, not for her. She would remain and stand with her people. Vol'dun driven from their homes, kin caught in a war they did not start. "This is my fight," she said, and with a nod that held no bitterness, she watched the outsider go. A pale pterodax swept down from the sky, wings slicing through heat and wind. Vorrik mounted first. The outsider followed its shadow as it banked toward the southwest, toward the sanctuary, toward whatever waited at their destination. Inside the sanctuary's upper chamber, silence had claimed what the battle had left behind. Defenders of the temple and Sand Fury assassins alike had fallen where the clash had spent them. Sarek among them, his service ended without ceremony. Of the keystones, there was no trace, nor was there sign of Kaja or Rakera. Vorrik stood amid the ruin, a stillness about him deeper than grief. He said nothing. The moment did not call for mourning, not yet. The time for loss would come when the pursuit was over. For now, they would follow the open wound Jakra'zet had carved through the desert and chase it to its source. The trail led them to the end of the map, a place once sealed, now broken. It was no battlefield. It was older than war, older than even the Faithless rebellion. Built as a tomb when Zandalar still thought stone could hold back fate. It was here the Empire buried what it feared most, locking Mythrax in silence and sand beneath wards carved by their high priests. No one was meant to return, and yet now, Atulamon stood open. The entrance lay flat against the earth, a broken ward flickering faintly where a barrier had once held strong. Now it stood open, the seal undone. Vorrik stood at the arch, the decision already behind him. The enemy had gone inside, and so would they. The air changed at once beyond the threshold. The heat gave way to cool, breathless damp, edged with something that felt misplaced in stone, a memory of decay or hunger left too long in the dark. Vorrik moved ahead with the kind of caution that had nothing to do with fear. Mythrax had been entombed here once, and the walls had not forgotten. They found Kaja first. The cave's root-choked corridors narrowed around her, bound but breathing, caught in some parasitic growth that recoiled when cut. She barely paused when freed, no complaint, no confusion, just forward. Rakera waited deeper still, half swallowed by the same dark bloom. But when she rose whole, wordless. She moved to the front, her footing sure, her pulse already set to battle. The passage widened, crimson light clung to every surface, thick as mist, until the air itself felt unclean. They came to the blood font. It was no altar. It was a reckoning. The chamber split like a wound across the rock, one half swallowed in shadow, the other drowning in a light that pulsed from a ritual still in motion. At the far end stood Jakra'zet, his voice raised in chant over a large pit. Around him, Sand Fury stood in ranks, unmoving. One step shattered the stillness. The chanting ceased. There was no transition. One moment, breath. The next, blood. The Sand Fury fell like marionettes with their strings cut, silent, limp, and final. Then the storm broke. It was not battle, it was upheaval. Wards burst, shock hammered the floor, fire cracked and vanished between one heartbeat and the next. The outsider pressed forward as the others faltered, Kaja first, then Vorrik, then Rakera, all gripped by the ritual's reach, their motions stilled as if snared in tar. One remained and one was enough. Through noise, through pain, through whatever Jakra'zet had summoned into this place, the outsider held. And Jakra'zet broke. Not in body, but in patience. He turned laughing and cast himself into the pit. The stone moaned, the world changed. From the depths of the font, something vast stirred. It did not climb. It rose, like inevitability. Vorrik knew it without needing the name. Rakera gave it anyway, flat and final. Mythrax. There was no triumph in that hall, only warning. No trophy to claim, only the echo of a sealed tomb reopened. They left the blood behind and turned toward Sethraliss. Hope did not wait in the blade, nor in the halls of fallen kings, but in the silence of a temple that had not yet given up its breath. The way back led through the temple of Sethraliss, long since defiled by the Faithless and left hollow in its silence. But the Loa's presence still lingered, buried beneath disbelief, waiting to be answered. The outsider stepped through the shattered gate and was met with resistance, not sacred trials but zealotry. Adaris and Azpik stood barring the threshold, two Sethrak whose loyalty belonged not to the Loa but to their cause. They did not seek to protect the temple, they sought to stop it from mattering. Their belief had curdled into denial, and they fought with the desperation of those who feared being wrong. They fell. Deeper within, Merektha coiled through the dust, massive and ravenous. She was no spirit, only flesh, bred from stolen power, a broodmother crafted to outlast hope itself. Her clutch had already begun to hatch, fangs and scales tearing through the earth in waves, but the outsider carved a path through every last one. In the end, the ground stilled, and the mother fell with it. Beyond her lair, the air grew charged. Currents sparked in the stone, pulsing with unnatural rhythm. Jakra'zet waited there, storm given form, a twisted elemental bird from the temple's own heart. He had once been lightning, perhaps. Now he was fury. The outsider brought silence instead. The path at last led to the sanctuary's core, where the Avatar of Sethraliss lay dimmed and flickering, held upright only by memory. She was not absent. She was sick, tainted by hands that feared her return, surrounded by hexers and guardians tasked with keeping her from rising. The outsider did not pray. They fought. Wave after wave of Jakra'zet's agents poured into the chamber, hoodoo casters, poison-flinging beasts, spectral toads summoned from ruin. The outsider struck them down, broke their wards, burned their corruption from the air. Between each clash came a breath, a chance, just long enough to place a hand to the Avatar's form and offer power in return. The light within her stirred. Again and again, every pause, every wound, every moment stolen from death was poured into her restoration. The enemy fought harder, the outsider stood firmer. And then she rose, not in flame, not in thunder, but in presence. The Avatar of Sethraliss stood, whole, awake. She brought with her a stillness that cut through all noise, one that rewrote the chamber around her, clearing the taint with a single gaze. Her power was not shouted, it was felt, deep in the bones, beneath the breath, in the stone itself. The sanctuary breathed again. When they returned to the sanctuary's upper chamber, the wounds had not closed, but the silence had changed. In the center of the hall now stood a radiant projection of Sethraliss's avatar, tall, patient, watchful. Her light did not erase the blood, it softened it. It did not promise safety, it promised that she was here. There were no words, only movement. Southward, the road wound toward Zandalar, where word would be carried beyond sand and stone. The city would learn what had stirred beneath Atulaman, and what it would take to stop it. And that's going to do it for this one. Hopefully you did enjoy. Thanks for checking it out. And please, do take care of yourself. See you in the next one.